Peace, guys. Let me just. You really directed me something in a really interesting way, but I could see why. I could see why. Because, I see why. Okay. Follow up to one minute. But the way it's amazing how you do this. But it really, let's get in alignment. So it was frightening, but then it brought me to, okay, hold on. But there's something to be, the whole point of our activities, I understand it, is it's activist and educational, as we try to understand. So what happened is, let's forget about what happened afterwards. You directed me. What happened is someone you would lined up with a guy, an American guy. See, sometimes when it's confusing. Sometimes when there's a guy who was homeless. I said, "How is it in the cold and everything?" He's freezing at night. So I gave him $20, just get a blanket or something. But here's the thing, but then it was okay, brought me down to earth, sort in a way. Okay, hold on, in the way I come down, just on earth, all right, I'm losing perspective. But then, you did the thing with the technology where you put something on the iPod, right? I mean, cause what it and this is what I took from it, right? I mean. And it's a sort of counseling what was on the other thing, right? The track on that, right? I mean, the best way I could approach it is to say, what do I think of what he's saying? Because that would be how, is to be honest. Because what he said is this, in other words, we were sort of let's get in alignment. I see we already talked at the beginning of the other video of why I was oh, I see where you're showing the camera down, right, who am I to talk about race or something, or something like that, right? And you directed me in a very real way first, someone shows up who's living on the street, but then that track by Christian Parenti, the point is what do I think of that, and that's the best. Is what is my private subjective, do I think what I think of that. And what he starts with saying is, he says, look, that his view of how racism is functioning, how is it was the racism of the way that the society is structured. He starts by saying he doesn't agree with. It was he's sort of like-minded to. I sort of always his father is not the same as he is. He saying he like myself doesn't really agree with. And by the way, in full disclosure, let's we're talking about, but he's white, okay, but it's irrelevant, but maybe not, because he's white. So wait, hold on. I mean, it's coming from a white person. And what he's saying is something that I agree with, that he has an alternate picture of what, let's say, an Angela Davis, who's made recordings on what's called the prison industrial complex. And I listened to that lecture, and I didn't agree with her. I didn't agree with that way of looking at it. The racism, as how is the racism functioning in this mass incarceration and mass homelessness and poverty, that's mainly the majority of it is poor Black American people. I mean, it is. I mean, that's the main event. I mean, it really is. I mean, to say there are other the percentage of that population that's African American. I mean, it's almost, okay, that's the event. Well, mass incarceration, mass homelessness, and mass starvation, poverty. Okay. See, he starts by saying what I say, I don't agree with Angela Davis, who is African American, but this prison industrial complex is being a racist, that it's a racist sort of prison industrial complex, that term and everything. And he's saying, okay, it's not, he's like myself, doesn't find that to be what's happening in reality. But he says, but it's still what's happening to African American people in the country. It still has to be linked in some way to this incarnation, to capitalism as it is here, you know, as it is here, American capitalism and racism. I mean, it has to. Because of, it's just the same reason we said before, like what that African American conservative said, like, right, he's denying that race is playing a role or racism is playing a role. And of course it is, but especially if you know who like owns the society and how they view all people who want, like, sort of like, white Protestant came here with land grants from the king or something, view me like the same way. But he's saying, okay, so if it's not like prison industrial like economism or whatever, so how do we explain the buildup of like police brutality, mass incarceration, mass homelessness, but particularly the policing in prison, like way that's directed entirely at poor black people? It is. The person like me, I get arrested for drugs and things like that. You go to the judge's chambers, they wipe it out. I mean, this is something directed at black people. Okay, but he says, so then what is it? And if it's not like a prison industrial complex version of it, and what he's saying is this. He's describing that at a certain point, okay, he starts by saying, that up until the 1970s, like, it's always we've been trying to move away from racist attitudes, but as far as what's happening, he's saying that, like, okay, up and after World War II, he's saying is, look, after World War II, the way he's saying, here's the position of American capitalism after World War II. Okay, he's saying, look, the so many economies, we were the only economy and society like intact. It was wrecked. All the other societies like devastated, destroyed. Okay, he says, okay, fine. They're in the process during that period after World War II of rebuilding. The societies are destroyed, and American capital is in a position to supply their markets. Everything needs to be rebuilt. We're the only functioning society. Okay, and remember, we had like sort of a command economy during the war. I mean, that wasn't really. There's a special kind of capitalism we had going then. Okay, and so he's saying, but then he was doing that. And that at a certain point, remember, this has nothing to do with, okay, he's saying fine, but then at a certain point, those societies were rebuilt. They were rebuilt, they're functioning, they can manufacture and supply their own markets, they're exporting, they're back intact, and we have an overproduction crisis here in the 70s, okay? But like that is like that there's no longer all those markets in all these different societies that were destroyed by us. And he's saying, okay, so what happened? But he said during that time period, like workers and unions were sort of where wages were high, there was work. The unions were in a position to negotiate, or that is, they were powerful in the sense of being able to negotiate with the owners, and all that, collect all that, everything. He's saying, okay, so wages are going up, the unions are incredibly powerful, but like capital doesn't have all these markets to supply anymore. That all went away. Okay, there's overproduction here. So he's saying, like, after that point, he said, like, but it's always been like this, but at that point, he said, capitalism, like, at that point, needs poverty. At that point, it can't, like, it was, unless there's a giant population of, like, people who are, like, living on the streets, don't have any options, are imprisoned, this and that. If there isn't that in existence as a threat of then he's saying, okay, so then workers are like, he's saying that let's stop there for 3 seconds. I mean, it's like, but he's just describing the racism of why there is this like police and prison regime attacking poor black people, and there is no work for such people. It's as though they're, just they're the target, and it is linked to this form of capitalism, and then got this attack on African American people ramped up to the point where, as Chomsky says, conditions have become worse, and were becoming worse than they were when the society was more racist, and that's a major. I mean, that's like. The society's getting less racist, but conditions for black people are getting worse. That's what he's like. So he starts with that. Let's stop there for a minute. But I want to get in alignment because all the things that thing popped up on the iPod. Then that guy showed up. I mean, that's amazing that's all happening in our game. That's not a game. So that's something we see. What do I think of what he's saying? And that actually, where he goes with it and what he's saying is essentially how I perceive it too, basically. But I have to talk it out with you. But yes, it's of course it's based on racism, and we've been over this in another video, that the concern among the sort of like white liberal, that persons like me might be racist or something because we're not weren't focused on that, or weren't thinking much about it or something. That's the way in which they see us as racist. They don't really, partly because those kind of people don't know they're not in my sector where we know who owns the society. Those are racist people. Remember, they talk of breeding. They're a type of person. It's a whole other species of white people who's into breeding. Breeding. Okay, they're into that. That kind of level of looking at race. I mean, a lot of them, they often talk about like the long history of like the owners with like, we've talked about this, gaming, alcohol, tobacco, the gun companies. Those are the owners of our society, and they're homicidally racist. That's why sort of people sort of resent being called racist for sort of not being sensitive enough to such things. That's something I need to grow up. But no. The owners, those are racist people, and they hate people like me, but quite a lot too. So we'll stop there for a minute.